and we'll start, as I mentioned, with the death of Hector in book 22. Before the encounter of Hector and Achilles in this climactic battle, we have depictions of Troy, and again we have depictions of their civilized existence, and let's say the city as it exists outside of the terrors of war. And to quote here, where the wives of Troy and all their lovely daughters would wash their glistening robes in the old days, the days of peace before the sons of Achaia came. Achilles versus Hector. So I want to point out how their characters have been, in a way, opposed throughout the epic. And there are several important contrasts that we need to keep in mind as we think about this climactic conflict. Their family situations are contrasted throughout the epic. So Hector, as we saw, is depicted in his role as loving father, devoted husband, and we saw that in book 6, of course, most particularly. Achilles is without family. We know that he has a father, but the father is away in a distant land. He mentions, of course, we see his mother, but it's a goddess. It's not the same type of situation of a human family. He's really alone and underscored in this role of soldier only. That's his primary attachment, is to his identity as soldier. There's an opposition in terms of their knowledge of the future. Achilles knows he has two possible fates, and it's really kind of defines some of the actions and some of his choices. Whereas Achilles is human and fallible. He misunderstands prophecies and disregards them in some cases. And then there's the opposition in terms of their motivations for fighting. So Hector would prefer not to fight, but he knows that he must to defend the city and his people. And he subordinates, in a way, his individual desires to the good of society. And Achilles first refuses to fight, and then only engages in the actual combat out of revenge for Patroclus. So his motivations are in every respect individual, as opposed to out of a sense of duty for the community. I want to point to this episode. We won't turn to the text just for the sake of time, but I want to point to this episode before the actual conflict. Achilles is coming on. Priam and Hecuba have pleaded with Hector to stay within the walls. Why go battle this warlike fiend? Achilles, who's managed to mow down over the course of what's depicted in books 19 to 21 a majority of the Trojan army and everyone who's dared face him. Hector refuses those pleas from his mother and his father, Priam and Hecuba. But as he stands there, he debates. He debates for a good 50 lines almost in terms of possible alternatives. He says, okay, well, I could run back into the gates, then I'd be shamed by these other Trojans. I could just try to go up and speak to Achilles, human to human. So he debates these various courses of action and has different mood swings of valor. No, I must fight him, and then sense of wanting to maybe not do that for various reasons. So this back and forth deliberation in his mind out of kind of resolve and conviction, and then doubt about whether or not it's right course of action, adds a real, let's say, dimension and sense of mood and reality to Hector's character, as opposed to often, especially in classical literature, there's a sense of a two-dimensionality of character. Here we have almost a burgeoning interiority there. I wouldn't dare say take it that far, but we do have conflicting thoughts that go through Hector's mind. Before they battle, Hector says that they should promise to return the corpse of the other to their family. And Achilles flatly rejects that. And then I'll just highlight these lines. This is Achilles. Don't talk to me of packs. There are no binding oaths between men and lions. Wolves and lambs can enjoy no meeting of the minds. They are all bent on hating each other to the death. So we get this sense that in this comparison, men and lions, wolves and lambs, that in both cases, Achilles is that predator, and he's the one that is let's say, outside the norms of civilization and is threatening the norms of civilization, and is the one that you're not going to be able to reason with. Whereas the human, of course, there's no pact between men and lions, but there's pacts between men and men, right? So which one is the man and which one is the lion? Well, in this instance, Hector is trying to reason and saying, well, why don't we have this pact that will return the body? And Achilles says no. So Achilles' rage is still going, let's say, full tilt here, but now it's directed totally at Hector as opposed to Agamemnon as it was at the beginning. It's still an excessive rage, let us say, and an excessive rage that puts him on the side of the not human, in this case, of bestial, right? So below human. Achilles answers Hector's plea and offer of ransom 100 lines later. So, beg no more, you fawning dog, begging me by your parents. Would to God my rage, my fury would drive me now to hack your flesh away and eat you raw. So again, this notion that like a lion, like a wolf, he wants to eat Hector raw to some extent. He wants to be so bestial to take that next step. In some ways, he wishes he could. We're reminded in that line of eating him raw. I'm going to point this out. It comes up a few times in the Iliad. So we're reminded of this kind of hatred that Hera has for the Trojans when Zeus says early on this is book 4. Zeus is mentioning to Hera, Hera's expressed excessive rage that she wants to know, we've got to make sure Troy is destroyed, and remember that's back to the judgment of Paris. And Zeus says, insatiable Hera, how great are the pains that Priam and Priam's sons have heaped on you, that you rage on, relentless, forever bent on raising the well-built heights of Troy. Only if you could breach their gates and their long walls and devour Priam and Priam's sons and the Trojan armies raw, then you just might cure your rage at last. And I'll point out too, we won't turn to those lines, but in book 24, there's a rage expressed by Hecuba, Hector's mother, toward Achilles. So Achilles is not present, but she's speaking to others about the say the grief and the tragedy that Achilles has brought on her by killing Hector and others of her sons. And she too expresses the wish to devour Achilles raw. So there are these different moments where excessive rage is expressed in those terms. Pardon me. And in terms of the excessive rage of Hera, we'll keep this in mind too in the Aeneid. The whole action of the Aeneid is driven by the excessive rage of Juno, which is the Roman name for the Greek goddess Hera. So at this point, just to underscore this Achilles Inhuman Rage, let's turn to this scene. It's a scene where Achilles' rage has driven him to unleash more hatred on the body of Hector after he's killed him. So he goes to excessive lengths to defile the body, and we'll bring up the text then so we can look at it ourselves. So here we are. This is book 22. It's line 465 or so. So he triumphed, and now he was bent on outrage, on shaming noble Hector, piercing the tendons, ankle to heel, behind both feet. He knotted straps of rawhide through them both, lashed them to his chariot, left the head to drag, and mounting the car, hoisting the famous arms abroad, He whipped his team to a run, and breakneck on they flew, holding nothing back. And a thick cloud of dust rose up from the man they dragged, his dark hair swirling round that head so handsome once, all tumbled low in the dust, since Zeus had given him over to his enemies now, to be defiled in the land of his own fathers. So his whole head was dragged down in the dust, and now his mother began to tear her hair. She flung her shining veil to the ground and raised a high, shattering scream, looking down at her son. Pitifully, his loving father groaned, and round the king his people cried with grief and wailing seized the city. For all the world, as if all Troy were torched and smoldering down from the looming brows of the citadel to her roots. So it's a haunting scene, as I said there. It's quite the gruesome scene. Let's also reflect too that, as I point out in this slide here, that this scene becomes a prototype in the Greek world for, let us say, again, excessive rage, or a way of a conqueror to belittle an enemy. So Alexander the Great in 332 CE of the before the Common Era captures Gaza, and the Persians, who controlled Gaza at the time, had put up a stiff resistance. So it took 4 successive Macedonian assaults. So this is again 332 before the Common Era, and Homer's writing maybe 750, so about 400 years later. 400 years later, Alexander the Great, who knows Homer, has read Homer, he finally conquers Gaza, and has the commander of the Gaza regiment there brought to him, and then of course imitates the actions of Achilles in binding his ankles to leather straps, tying them to the back of his chariot, and then driving and dragging the body of Battus around the walls of Gaza. So this is recounted in the Roman historian Quintus Curtius Rufus in his history of Alexander the Great. So thongs were, this is from this book, quoting Rufus, thongs were passed through Battus' ankles while he still breathed, and he was tied to a chariot. Then Alexander's horses dragged him around the city while the king gloated at having followed the example of his ancestor Achilles in punishing his enemy. So this is a powerful image. It disgusts us. You know, we think of it as horrible, and I think in Homer it is seen as excessive, but in the Greek world, for an Alexander who sees himself as above all others, kind of in the same way as an Achilles was above all others, it can be seen as a prototype of how to treat an intractable enemy that you really want to revenge yourself against. Now let's also go to the reaction of Andromache. So, and I want to point out here that Andromache's reaction, it shows her as in a way dying, just like Hector. So this is again book 22, around line 540. So she cried, dashing out of the royal halls like a madwoman, her heart racing hard, her women close behind her. But once she reached the tower where soldiers massed, she stopped on the rampart, looking down, and saw it all, saw him dragged before the city, stallions galloping, dragging Hector back to Achaea's beaked warships. Ruthless work. The world went black as night before her eyes. She fainted, falling backward, gasping away her breath. So she's depicted as dying, very much like Hector there. Losing your breath. Your breath is the essence of life there. She flung to the winds her glittering headdress, the cap and the coronet, braided band and veil, all the regalia golden Aphrodite gave her once. The day that Hector, helmet aflash in sunlight, led her home to Troy from her father's house, with countless wedding gifts to win her heart. But crowding round her now, her husband's sisters and brothers' wives supported her in their midst, and she, terrified, stunned to the point of death, struggling for breath now and coming back to life, burst out in grief among the Trojan women. "Oh, Hector, I am destroyed. Both born to the same fate after all. You at Troy in the halls of King Priam, I at Thebes under the timberline of Placos, Edion's house. He raised me as a child, that man of doom, his daughter just as doomed. Would to God he'd never fathered me." So haunting words, let's recall that Andromache back in book 6 had really stressed how Hector was her whole world now. She had lost her family again to Achilles, that she knows that her son will be killed, Styanax, and that she will be sold into slavery. So her whole world's collapsing now, and in a way the death is figurative, but also in a real literal way, her life as she knows it is over.